guys! I just thought maybe you missed me reading to you, so I figured I would do a video. But actually the reality is the woman whose videos I was using before, she made them all private. So now I have to do this. But that's okay. This is chapter 2. Starts off, it's called Dreams. And then we will also look at chapter 3 for this week. Every spring and fall, during the holidays of Big Id and Small Id, my family visited me in one of my favorite places on earth, Shangla, the mountain village where my parents grew up. Laden with presents for our relatives, embroidered shawls, boxes of rose and pistachio sweets, and medicines they couldn't get in the village, would go in the Mingora bus station and see just about everybody else in town all crowded together and waiting for the flying coach. We'd stack our gifts, along with other sacks of flour and sugar, blankets, and trunks that other families were taking, on top of the bus in a great towering pile. Then, we all crammed inside for a 4-hour trip up winding, rutted roads to the mountains. For the first quarter of the journey, the road was a series of zigs and zags that followed the Swat River on one side and hugged sheer cliffs on the other. My brothers took great pleasure in pointing out the wreckage of vehicles that had fallen into the valley below. The flying coach would climb higher and higher until the air turned cool and crisp. Eventually we saw nothing but mountain after mountain, 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 and just a sliver of sky. Many of the people in Shangla were very poor and did not have modern facilities, such as hospitals and markets, but our family always put on a huge feast for us when we arrived. A feast that was especially welcome at Small Id, which marks the end of the month of daytime fasting for Ramadan. There were bowls of chicken and rice, spinach and lamb, big crunchy apples, pretty yellow cakes, and big kettles of sweet milky tea. Even when I was only 7 or 8, I was considered a very sophisticated city girl, and sometimes my cousins teased me because I didn't like to go barefoot and I wore clothes bought at the bazaar and not homemade like theirs. I had a city accent and spoke city slang, so they thought I was modern. If only they knew. People from real cities like Peshawar and Islamabad would have thought me very backward. When I was in the village, though, I lived the life of a country girl. In the morning I got up when the rooster crowed, or when I heard the clatter of dishes as women downstairs made breakfast for the men. Then all of the children spilled out of the house to greet the day. We ate honey straight from the hive and green plums sprinkled with salt. None of us had any toys or books, so we played hopscotch and cricket in the gully. Cricket is a game. It's not like they're not playing with crickets. In the afternoon, the boys would go off fishing while the girls went down to the stream to play our favorite game, wedding. We would choose a bride and then prepare her for the ceremony. We draped her in bangles and necklaces and painted her face with makeup and her hands with henna. Once she was ready to be given to the groom, she would pretend to cry, and we would stroke her hair and tell her not to worry. Sometimes we would fall down laughing. But life for the women in the mountains was not easy. There were no proper shops, no universities, no hospitals or female doctors, no clean water or electricity from the government. Many of the men had left the villages to work on the road crews and in mines far, far away, sending money home when they could. Sometimes the men never made it back. The women of the village also had to hide their faces whenever they left home, and they could not meet or speak to men who were not their close relatives. None of them could read. Even my own mother, who'd grown up in the village, couldn't read. It is not at all uncommon for women in my country to be illiterate, but to see my mother, a proud and intelligent woman, struggle to read the prices in the bazaar was an unspoken sadness for both of us, I think. Many of the girls in the village, including most of my own cousins, didn't go to school. Some fathers don't even think of their daughters as valued members of their families because they'll be married off at a young age to live with their husband's family. Why send a daughter to school, the men often say. She doesn't need to be educated to run a house. I would never talk back to my elders. In my culture, one must never disrespect one's elders, even if they are wrong. But when I saw how hard these women's lives were, I was confused and sad. Why were women treated so poorly in our country? I asked my father this, and he told me that life was even worse for women in Afghanistan, where a group called the Taliban had taken over the country. Schools for girls had been burned to the ground, and all women were forced to wear a severe form of the burqa, a head-to-toe veil that that had only a tiny fabric grill for the eyes. Women were banned from laughing out loud or wearing nail polish, and they were beaten or jailed for walking without a male family member. I shuddered when he told me such things and thanked God I lived in Pakistan, where a girl was free to go to school. It was the first time I'd heard of the Taliban. What I didn't realize was that they weren't only in Afghanistan. There was another group in Pakistan not far away in the tribal belt, known as Fatah. Some of them were Pashtuns, like me, and they would soon come to cast a dark shadow over my sunny childhood. But my father told me not to worry. I will protect your freedom, Malala, he said. Carry on with your dreams. Chapter 3, A Magic Pencil. By the time I was 8 years old, my father had more than 800 students in 3 campuses, an elementary division and 2 high schools, one for boys and one for girls. So our family finally had enough money to buy a TV. Imagine not having a TV until you were 8. I didn't, but... That's when I became obsessed with owning a magic pencil. I got the idea from Shakalaka Boom Boom, the show Safina and I watched after school. It was about a boy named Sanju, who could make anything real by drawing it. If he was hungry, he drew a bowl of curry and it appeared. If he was in danger, he drew a policeman. He was a little hero, always protecting people who were in danger. At night I would pray, God, please give me Sanju's pencil. I won't tell anyone. Just leave it in my cupboard. I will use it to make everyone happy. As soon as I finished praying, I would check the drawer, but the pencil was never there. One afternoon, the boys weren't home, and my mother asked me to throw away some potato peels and eggshells. I walked to the dump just a block or so from our house, wrinkling my nose as I got close, swatting away flies, and making sure I didn't step on anything in my nice shoes. If only I had Sanju's magic pencil, I would erase it all, the smells, the rats, the giant mountain of rotting food. As I tossed our rubbish onto the heap, I saw something moved, and I jumped. It was a girl my age. Her hair was matted, and her skin was covered in sores. She was sorting rubbish into piles, one for cans and one for bottles. Nearby, boys were fishing in the pile for metal using magnets on strings. I wanted to talk to them, but I was scared. Later that day, when my father returned home, I told him about the children at the dump and dragged him to see them. He spoke gently to the children, but they ran away. I asked him why they weren't in school, and he told me that these children were supporting their families, selling whatever they found for a few rupees. If they went to school, their families would go hungry. As we walked back home, I saw tears on his cheek. I believe there is something good for every evil, that every time there's a bad person, God sends a good one. So I decided it was time to talk to God about this problem. Dear God, I wrote in a letter, did you know there are children who are forced to work in the rubbish heap? I stopped. Of course he knew. Then I realized that it was his will that I had seen them. He was showing me what my life might be like if I couldn't go to school. Until then, I had believed a magic pencil would change the world. Now I knew I would have to do something. I didn't know what it was, but I asked God for the strength and courage to make the world a better place. I signed my letter, rolled it up, tied it to a piece of wood, placed a dandelion on top, and floated it in the stream that flows into the Swat River. Surely God would find it there. As much as I wanted to help the children from the dump, my mother wanted to help everyone. She had started putting bread crusts in a bowl on the kitchen windowsill. Nearby was an extra pot of rice and chicken. The bread was for the birds, the food was for a poor family that lived in our neighborhood. I asked her once why she always gave food away. We have known what it is like to be hungry, Pisho, she said to me. We must never forget to share what we have. So we shared everything we had. We even shared our home with a family of 7 who had fallen on hard times. They were supposed to pay father rent, but more often than not, he ended up lending them money. And although my father's school wasn't really making a profit, he gave away more than 100 free places to poor children. He wished he could have given them more. My mother, meanwhile, started serving a few girls breakfast at our house each day. How can they learn, she said, if their stomachs are empty? One day I noticed that some of our longtime students had not returned. I asked my father where they were. Oh, Johnny, he said. Some of the richer parents took their children out of school when they found out that we were sharing classrooms with the sons and daughters of people who cleaned their houses or washed their clothes. I was young, but I was old enough to feel that wasn't right and to understand that if too many paying students left, it would mean hard times for the school and for our family. What I didn't know was that a bigger threat was looming, not just for our family and our school, but for all of Pakistan.